Hello, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the Ask Avijay show. This is a history episode. We're going to talk about history. I'm going to take questions that you all have asked in the comments. We'll do that, but before that, let's see who is there on the live chat today. Yes, it's an early episode, it's an early session. We couldn't do one yesterday because of various reasons. So let's see who is there. I can see Sujata is from Singapore. Well, namaste. Ahilya Patil, hello. Ronit Kumar, Sandeep Naik, Bharat Varsha, Shashi Kumar, Vladimir Putin says my notifications have stopped. Well, I can't control that, so it is what it is. Anonymous Scientist says bonjour and congrats for publishing the brilliant books. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Please do read. Shrutika is there. Tushar Kalburgi, Mrinal Dev Aman from Mumbai, Vidhi Manyar, Aditya Singh Rathore from Pune. Who else do we have? Satellite. We have Shri Satellite from Goa with us today. Abhishek, Kapil Singh, Rishabh Shekhar, Creative Clips, Aman, Ashwini, Abhinav Mishra, Ayush Singh, Pranam, Vikas PJ, I'm Artistic, Shashi Kumar, Hinsi Penguin, hello, Sandeep Naik, good evening, Ronit Kumar, who else? Bharat Biduri, Event Countdown, Vladimir Putin, Nabanita Das, Teen Talks Dharma, who has Dhruv Duria, Geopolitical Dubey from Indore, Lathangi Suresh, Vikas PJ, Shrey Vyas, Rohit, Kalita, Vishwa, Samrat Shukla, Piyush Suri, Vikash, Bharat Varsha. Yes, full books will come eventually. I'm writing books in a serialized fashion, one chapter at a time. Each chapter is not small, it's substantial. Amisha is saying, please launch the book in hard copy. Yeah, I'll launch it once the book is complete. Right now, I'm releasing the books in episodic format. So once the entire set of episodes is done, I will have it published in hard copy format. And yeah, you will be able to get it at that point in physical form. Kevin Shibu, Progressive Pujan, Bill Ackman. How many hours do you read books daily? Well, it depends. I mean, there's no set time. A couple of hours, maybe sometimes it's like a whole day. Depends. And so much more. Shubham Barve, Samrat Shukla, Deadly Ninja, Random Shots. Hello. Kevin Shibu, Ayush, Nishal Rai, Mahish Reshta, Kloster, Aditya Chilikoti, Advay, Samrat, Kevin Shibu, Feels Strong Man, Sandeep Nayak, Mayank, and everybody else. All right. I have greeted you all. I will not be able to greet everyone individually, but thank you so much for being on the live chat. I can see Tejas. Hi, Tejas. Good to see you, sir. I hope your health is good. Do well, sir. Keep taking care of yourself. Tejas, it's good to see you again. One of our long-time viewers. Very good to see you. All right. And so thank you, everyone, for being on the live chat. Now, let's take some questions. Aman, you're very welcome. Rohit doesn't like fiction books. That's all right. That's okay. You should go with what you like, sir. We should go with what you like. Okay, let's go and take some questions. I have a bunch of questions that you all have asked, and I'll take as many of these as possible. Let's go for the first one. This is by Rahul Dunake. The question is, the dinosaurs were killed off, well, the non-avian dinosaurs were killed off 66 million years ago due to the impact of a 15-kilometer wide, roughly, meteorite, asteroid, comet, whatever it was, that happened. The impact was in Yucatan, present-day Yucatan, the Chicxulub impact. So can we say that some of the megafauna, like the Stegodon in the Indian subcontinent, became extinct in the Pleistocene epoch by the Lonar crater causing meteorite? Interesting question. So do we know what the Lonar crater is? I mean, many of you may perhaps not know about it. It's a significant meteor crater in India, in Maharashtra. And so first of all, let's go and find the Lonar crater. Let's go to the maps. Outstanding. First question itself brings the maps on the screen. All right. So we have, well, let's zoom into India and let's just search for it. Lonar Lake. It's a lake now, but it was a crater. Well, let's take a look at the satellite image. So as you can see, it's a roughly circular thing. Yeah. And this is located, if we zoom out, you can see it is in Maharashtra. Let's zoom in again. It's a roughly circular structure, right? And you can see there are more structures nearby. That seems to be a secondary impact, Amber Lake and so on. So this is a lake which is actually a crater, and this impact event happened about, I don't know, 50,000 years before today. 50,000, 55,000 years before today. That sort of thing. Okay, so it's a significant impact crater, not gigantic. What's the dimensions of this crater? About a kilometer, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 kilometers in diameter, if you were considering it to be an approximate circle, right? So that was the deal. So this impact crater is about 1.2 kilometers wide. The Chicxulub impact crater, which is no longer visible to the untrained naked eye, the Chicxulub impact crater is about 200 kilometers in diameter. Okay, and that was caused by something like a 10 to 15 kilometer large asteroid or comet impact. And that's the event that killed off the non-avian dinosaurs, and it caused a mass extinction event in conjunction with the Deccan Traps activity, volcanic activity that was happening in the Deccan region of India, when the Indian subcontinent was at the time in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It had still not hit Asia. So the Chicxulub impact crater is about 200 kilometers wide, and it caused a mass extinction on the planet. The Lonar crater is let's say 1 kilometer wide. So it's 200 times smaller, right? So the impactor, the object that would have struck the Earth at Lonar would be roughly, you could say, 200 times smaller than the Chicxulub impact object. So if that thing was 15 kilometers wide, let's divide by 10. So that's 1.5 kilometers. Let's divide by 10 again. That's 150 meters. Divide by 2, 75 meters. So the object that would have caused the Lonar impact would have been about 75 meters in diameter, so, which is similar to the object that caused the Tunguska event in 1908. The Tunguska event was it was not an impact event because the object exploded in the sky, but it caused a gigantic area of devastation in essentially uninhabited part of Russia. It leveled enormous regions of forest and all that. And there are some lakes that you find in the region today that are possibly the consequence of that event. So the Lonar crater was probably caused by something similar to the object that caused the Tunguska event in 1908. And as we know, in 1908, it was pretty devastating locally over there, but it did not cause any extinction event. It did not cause any species to go extinct or any such thing. So the Lonar event would have been like that. It would have been pretty big. It would have been devastating at the time locally. Maybe over an area of maybe 500 square kilometers, maybe 1,000 square kilometers, or maybe a radius of 500 kilometers around the place where you have the impact crater. But it would not have been so devastating that it would have caused the extinction of various megafauna or any kind of fauna. So it would not have done that. Now the question people will be wondering, what is a stegodon, right? It was an ancient form of elephant. It was an ancient kind of elephant which used to live in the subcontinent, which existed in the subcontinent and beyond the subcontinent. So let's quickly take a look at what the stegodon looked like. Okay, it was a kind of elephant. Stegodon. You see, this is what a stegodon looked like, and this is, you could say, an artistic representation. It had larger tusks than present-day elephants. And this animal went extinct around 10,000 or so BC. That's not a whole lot of time ago. So the Lonar event happened, let's say, about 50,000 years before today. And the Stegodon went extinct about 12, 13, 15,000 years before today. So there's a significant time gap of more than 30,000 years between the extinction of the Stegodon and the time when the Lonar impact event happens. So clearly these two are not correlated. Okay, so that's how you look at it logically. You look at the time period of what happened when did the extinction of this animal happen. It happened about 10, 12, 15,000 years before today. But the Lonar event happened about 55,000 years before today. So that's a significant time gap. So there's no correlation there. And secondly, the Lonar, the object that would have impacted the Earth and created the Lonar crater was way smaller than the Chicxulub impactor, which was gigantic, massive. It caused a global mass extinction event, right? So, so it would be incorrect to think or to say that the Lonar event was responsible for the extinction of the Stegodon or any other megafauna. We have found, I mean, people have done some research here and there in the Lonar region, and it's a pretty significant impact crater, but they found no evidence of that event having caused any kind of mass extinction or even localized extinction events in the Indian subcontinent. All right. Second question. It's by Napoleon Singh Shekhawat. Please take my question. Well, here we have it. Who was the priest king? Why was his statue given to Pakistan? And why is Mr. Modi sometimes compared with him? Okay, let's find out who was the priest king. Let's put an image on the screen. Very, very iconic, very famous image, right? Priest. Sorry. Forgive my spelling. Priest king. This here image, iconic image that is of a statue that was discovered in Mohenjo-daro, probably Mohenjo-daro, and very famous image. It's one of the most iconic and most recognizable images from that time period of our history, the Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history. And this is one figurine of a human being, of a person from that time, possibly, that has been discovered. And this is, for some reason, called the priest king. And there's a lot of speculation as to who this person may or may not have been. Okay, so that's the priest king. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, was this individual a priest and a king? Was it so? Well, the truth is that we have absolutely no idea about the identity of the person that this figurine may depict. We don't know who it was. Was it a real person? Was it just a representation of a person? We don't know. Secondly, was he a priest? We have absolutely no idea. Was he a king? Well, did we have kings in those days? If you look at the archaeological evidence that we have from that time period in northern Western India, the Saraswati Sindhu region, the so-called Indus Valley culture region or Harappan culture region or whatever you want to call it, if you see that time period and the archaeological record from that time period, you will see that India, in this region, gigantic region, which is larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia put together. So in this region, during that time, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years before today, even 4,000 years before today, that time period, big time period, at that time India had, by the what's called the mature Harappan phase, become a completely, fully industrialized civilization and fully urbanized civilization. We had standardization of weights and measures, and we had the same grid layout of cities and towns and villages everywhere, and we had the same system everywhere, whether it is all the way north in Punjab, Haryana, even Kashmir, all the way south to northern Maharashtra, eastwards in Madhya Pradesh, or westwards to the border of present day Persia. That entire region, you will see the same structure of cities, with the same grid structure. Cities are well organized, and all of that is there. Civic amenities are available everywhere, that sort of thing. But what is strikingly absent is the absolute complete absence of any palaces, of any buildings or structures that you would associate with powerful figures, with power, with kings, like palaces or any such thing. There's no such thing. There is no building that is more magnificent than the other buildings. The biggest and supposedly magnificent buildings were the public buildings, like the public baths and assembly halls and all that. Right? But those structures served a civic purpose. It served a purpose that was for all of society. It was not something that was restricted to a certain category of people from this time period. So there's the complete absence of palaces. You can't see, generally when you look at the archaeological record of any time period from any part of the world, you will see that, you have certain social structure, social stratification is visible, and you can see that there are forts, there are palaces. Even if they are ruined, you can figure out what the social structure would have been like and what the power structure would have been like from the archaeological record. From this time period of Indian history, we find no such evidence. It's puzzling who ruled the people. How was the society organized? It was clearly fully industrialized. It was clearly extremely technologically advanced. It was clearly extremely well organized and well planned. But who ran the whole show? Who were the administrators? Who were the kings? No idea. Nothing is visible. Nothing is. You can't make out from the archaeological record. So clearly, it looks like there was no monarchy. Or if there was a monarchy system, then the kings lived very similar to the common people, if there were kings. And once again, we don't find any great temples or any such thing from that time period. We do find Vedic havans and we find shivlings and all. So our culture was there. But you did not have great temples. You did not have great palaces. No such thing. So then the question arises, who does this figure represent? Was it an important, let's say, politician from that time period? He does have a great amount of dignity, if you look at the way he's depicted, right? Or was it a priest? Well, did we have priests so the point I'm trying to make is that we have no idea how the society was run at the time. Did we have priests who were a higher class? Did we have kings and royalty or an aristocracy that was a higher class? It doesn't look like that was the case because there's no evidence of that. Once again, let me say that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Maybe it was done in a very subtle way, right? The organization of society and the administration of society. But there's no evidence that we can find in the archaeological record. There were priests or there were kings. There would have been priests. But possibly, see, one aspect of our culture, of our civilization, is that our religion, what we now call Hinduism, is extremely decentralized. We don't have any popes. We don't have any religious leaders as such. Today, these days, you have Babas and whatnot. That's a very modern phenomenon. In the past, we had people like Aditya Shankaracharya who were extremely influential, but they were influential, not powerful. They did not create this military structure. I am at the top and then I have 5 lieutenants below me, and each lieutenant will have 20 lieutenants under them, and that sort of pyramidal structure. We do not have that ever. So our religion was extremely decentralized. So every home would have a fire havan place. Every home would possibly have a shivling, and people would do their worship on their own without needing higher guidance from some religious leader. So once again, the question is, does it then make sense to call somebody a priest? Does it make sense to call someone a king? The Greeks had this ideal, they had this ideal of the philosopher king, that the most enlightened kings are philosopher kings who are not just kings who hold power, but they're also extremely wise people, philosopher-like people, that sort of thing. Maybe that has been transposed upon this figure, and that's why it's called the priest king. I'm not sure who coined this term priest king, right? But there is no evidence that this person was a priest. There is no evidence that this person was a king. We don't even know who the person was, if it indeed depicts a real person from history. Maybe it does, probably it does. Maybe it was a very popular person. Maybe it was a person who was of great importance to society. We don't know for sure. So the gist of my answer is that we have absolutely no idea who this represents. What was the person's name? What did he do? What was his function in society? During what time period did this person live, if he did live, and so on. So that's about the priest king. It's a huge mystery. We don't know who it was. Why was this statue given to Pakistan? Well, don't ask me. I have no idea why the statue was given to Pakistan. It was discovered in the 1920s, 30s, whenever it was discovered, before the partition and destruction of India. And it was for a long time in a museum in Delhi, I believe. And after the 71 war, when India, for some reason, became again friendly with Pakistan, that's when the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto said that give us the figure of the priest king and give us the figure of the dancing girl. It's another very iconic statuette that we have of a dancing girl. And it looks like we only gave one, which was the priest king, and now it is in Karachi somewhere, in some museum in Karachi. Why did we have to give it to the Pakistanis? I have no idea. What was the need for that? Why do you have to make these unilateral concessions to a defeated country? Right? And they don't even believe in this culture anymore, the Pakistanis. So why did they want it? Why did we give it back? Well, why did we give it? Not give it back. It is ours anyway. Even if it may have been discovered in Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, wherever it was, which is currently in Pakistan temporarily. But it belongs to our civilization, our culture, not the culture and whatever the Pakistanis espouse today, right? So it was a political decision to give the priest king to the Pakistanis, and that's where the statue is today. Why is Mr. Modi compared to him? Well, look at the face. It's a very similar face, right? Mr. Modi does resemble the person depicted in this statue, in this figure. So that's why people compare Mr. Modi with him. I think I may have also been to some extent a causative figure in this comparison, because many years ago, I think 21 or something, I had put out a short video about something, and it was about did the Indus Valley civilization die away? That was the answer, the question that I'd answered in that short clip. And in the thumbnail, I had put an image of the priest king, so-called priest king, and an image of Mr. Modi, and you can see clearly so much resemblance, right? So really, it did die out. We're the same people. We're the descendants of the same people, of the people who lived during that time. That's the deal. So maybe that's why Mr. Modi is compared with him, because people imagine that the person depicted in the figure is perhaps a king, a great king from our ancient history, and Mr. Modi somehow has those characteristics, and the facial features are very similar. So that's why. Okay. Okay, real Vladimir Putin is here, and the question is, do you think that the painter's biggest mistake was attacking the USSR? If the painter didn't attack the USSR, then the Axis may have won. So, and if so, what would the world have looked like as a consequence of such a decision? And what would have been the impact on India? So the painter obviously refers to the Austrian painter, which is Adolf Hitler, who wanted to be a painter, and yeah, that's a whole different story from a certain period of his life. Was his biggest mistake attacking the USSR? Probably Operation Barbarossa. So the Soviets and the Nazis, the two governments had this non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, right? That we will not attack each other, and we will. The two nations had an understanding of how various subjugated nations their territories would be divided up, and so on. So there was this non-aggression pact between the USSR and Nazi Germany, and if let's say Hitler had not attacked the USSR, started Operation Barbarossa, then maybe he would have been able to focus on England, on Britain, and maybe he would have been able to conquer Britain. That's a possibility. And maybe he would have had more success in North Africa and whatever else he was doing through Rommel and his campaign, the Desert Foxes campaign in North Africa and so on. And obviously that would, and if he had not attacked the USSR, then the whole might of the USSR eventually would not have been unleashed on Nazi Germany, because 80% of the winning in Second World War was done by the Soviets, not by the Americans. The Americans entered the war at a much later period in the war. Okay? So it was the Soviets who did the fighting, the dying, and the winning. And the Americans now, because of Hollywood, they portray themselves as the greatest victors of the Second World War. And the consequence, the new world order that came as a consequence, it saw the ascendancy of the USA, and it became the most powerful nation, sure. But the Second World War was won by the Soviets, 80% of it, not in the European theater, in the Western theater, not by the Americans. So if the painter had decided not to attack the USSR, what could have happened? Then you would probably have had a situation where the painter would have conquered Britain, and maybe if that would have happened, he would have also captured much of North Africa, that Desert Fox campaign that was going on. Maybe he would have taken Suez and taken the Suez Canal in that case, if the non-aggression pact had held, right? And then what would have been the situation like? It would have been a situation like what you have in Europe today. You have Western Europe, which is dominated by NATO, and you have the Eastern European countries that are part of the Soviet bloc. I mean, today many of the Eastern European countries are also part of NATO. So essentially, it's the Russians standing alone against everyone in Europe, apart from a couple of countries like Belarus and so on. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, these are part of essentially the NATO bloc or EU bloc, and all the former Soviet satellite states are, you could say, now allies or vassals of the Americans. So if Hitler had not attacked the USSR, maybe that sort of situation would have happened, that you would have a bunch of nations that are under Soviet domination, and the rest of Europe would have been under Nazi occupation. That's what would have happened. And if the painter would have conquered the UK, then India would have been liberated, right? Then the connection between the British occupiers in India and their overlords in the UK would have been severe. It would have been cut off, and all the supplies and whatnot, and the leadership and whatever else was provided from the UK would not have happened. So that would have probably led to the overthrow, and all the puppets of the British Raj, the various politicians to whom power was eventually handed over in 1947, they would have lost power, because their power came from the overlordship of the British. I'll not take any names because that would be controversial. So India would have been liberated then, and the politicians who came to power in 47, 50, wherever, they would probably not have come to power. It would have been a clean liberation of India, and maybe India would have reverted to a civilizational status, which it currently doesn't have. So it would have been a major change. It would have had a major impact on India, a very positive impact on India, actually. Yeah, that's how the world works, you see. Cause and effect. Nirvana Shanks says, why is the Rosetta Stone so important, and how did it help understand Egyptian writing? The Rosetta Stone, Egyptian hieroglyphics. So the Egyptian script was not understood for a very long time, right? I mean, the Egyptians understood it, but then Egyptian culture and civilization was wiped out, right? Nothing persists until today, nothing at all from the old Egyptian civilization and culture. Nothing exists today, culturally, right? So Egypt's culture disappeared, it was destroyed, and for the longest time, for a period of more than about 1700 years, almost 2000 years, let's say, people did not know how to read the Egyptian inscriptions, the hieroglyphics. And once the West became dominant and they subjugated Egypt and other countries, their historians were fascinated with this Egyptian writing. So they wanted to understand what's written, but they had no way of deciphering the script. And then this stone was discovered. Let's take a look at what this stone looks like. It's an inscription in 3 different scripts. Okay, Rosetta Stone. What's it look like? We'll look at an image. So this is the Rosetta Stone. Okay, you can see there are 3 sections: top, middle, and bottom. And the 3 sections are written. It's the same message, essentially, the same message that is written in 3 different scripts. So which scripts is this message written in? One was the Egyptian hieroglyphic script, the second was the Egyptian demotic script, and the third was Greek. Because this inscription was made, the Rosetta Stone was made around 300 BC or some, around that time when Egypt was ruled by the Greeks, because of the effects of the conquest of Egypt by Alexander. So Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty, and this Rosetta Stone inscription is the same message in 3 different scripts: the hieroglyphic script, the demotic script, and Greek. Now Greek was understood to the Western historians. So then they started the process. Okay, now we have 3 scripts and we have the same message essentially. So let's try and now figure out. So slowly various historians, various linguists worked on it, and over a period of time they started cracking the script. So one of the ways of doing it is you find the names of kings in a script you understand, right? And if it's repeated 2-3 times, you look for certain similar patterns in the scripts you don't understand, and then you try, and then you know what the name of the king sounds when you write it in Greek. Now you find the same repeated patterns in the other scripts, that it means it has the same sound. So then you can understand what those 2-3 characters, what the sounds of those 2-3 characters mean. So you can assign sounds to the characters, and that's how you start working backwards and forwards in whichever way, and eventually you can decipher the script. So that's how it was done, and that's how it helped historians finally decipher the hieroglyphic script. Magnificent Shri Nehru ji says, when we say Indo-European languages, what does it really mean? In Bharat, we have our languages, which are, you could say, Apabhransha forms of Mother Sanskrit, corrupted forms of Mother Sanskrit, and we understand much of our language, like people from the south will get an idea of Punjabi, people from Bengal will understand Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi, Marathi, Bengali, almost the same, here and there with some differences. Yep, we do understand that. Yep. So what's the deal with the European languages? Because we don't understand a word of them, even though we say that these are part of the Indo-European language family. We use the term Indo-European languages. I am sure people of Europe will understand some multiple languages here and there. So is this Indo-European language family a complete figment of imagination? Is it fiction, or is it really a thing? Very good question you've asked. So in India, we understand each other's languages. Look, even if someone speaks Tamil, or if someone speaks Malayali, or someone speaks Kannada, they will still be able to understand a lot of words from the northern languages and so on. So because of the way the languages are, and because of thousands and tens and thousands of years of Indian history. And when it comes to what's called the Aryan languages or Indo-Aryan languages, well, they are very mutually intelligible. If you speak for example, Bengali, you will be able to understand much of what someone says in Hindi or Gujarati or Marathi or Punjabi or whatever, and so on. Very mutually intelligible with some changes, but you can understand what someone is saying. Similarly, in Europe, if someone speaks, let's say, Spanish, they'll be able to figure out what an Italian person is saying to some extent, right? The Romance languages. If someone speaks, let's say, German, they'll be able to understand what a Dutch person is speaking to some extent. Or if someone speaks English, they may be able to figure out what a German person is saying because of certain words that are kind of common. But when it comes to Indian languages and European languages, I mean, you really can't understand each other's languages, right? And then there's the case of Persian. So if you pay attention to Persian, if someone speaks Persian slowly, you will even be able to understand some Persian, because the Persian is way more similar, way closer to the Indian languages than to the Western languages, European languages. Now, so the question is what is this thing? Is this a truth? Is this a real thing, the Indo-European language family, or is it just fiction? So it's true. These languages are part of the same language family, and let me show you why. So let's see, okay? Indo-European languages, similar words, okay? Mother, father, sister, day, night, etc. I'm going to show you the similarities. Indo-European vocabulary. Where do we go? Indo-European, common words of Indo-European languages. Let's see this website. Okay, I have not seen it before. Do we have? Okay, here we have it. Mother, father. Okay. So Sanskrit. Mam means me. In Greek, it's eme. In Latin, it's me. In English, it's me. Tuam means you. It is in Greek, it's su. And tuam in Latin becomes tu. In English, it becomes thou, du, twe. Then tvam, similar. Then pitar. In Sanskrit, we say pitar. Pitru, pitar, right? That's father. In Greek, it becomes pater. In Latin, it becomes pater. In English, it becomes father, and so on. Mater in Sanskrit is mother, obviously, which becomes matter in Greek, matter in Latin, and mother in English. Bhratar in Sanskrit becomes frater in Latin and brother in English. Swastar or swastri in Sanskrit becomes soror in Latin and sister in English. Duhitar, which is daughter, becomes daughter in English, and thugatar in Greek. Ashwas becomes hippos, and ikwas in eo, and so much more. Janu means knee. It's the same word in French, genou, which is janu in Sanskrit. I mean, there's so many examples of this. You know, sapta is 7, which is hepta in Greek. It's also it's septem in Latin and 7 in English. Ashta becomes octo 8. Nava becomes novem or 9. Dasa becomes dekha in Greek, and decem in Latin. Shatam becomes hecton, centum, 100. Indo-Iranian words, it's even closer. Okay, Sanskrit and English, matar becomes mother, pitar becomes father, bhratar becomes brother, and so much more. So much more. There's so many similarities. If you look slightly below the surface, if you do a surface level analysis just on the basis of how languages sound, you won't see any similarities. But if you do a deeper analysis, you'll see shocking similarities emerge all over the place. All over the place. when it comes to the days of the week, okay, in Sanskrit we have what? Ravivar, Somvar, Mangalvar, Budh, Guru, Shukra, Shani. Now, Ravivar, Ravi, who is Ravi? Ravi means the sun. Ravivar becomes Sunday. Yes? Okay, Somvar, Monday, right? What is Som? Somvar, what is Som? Som means moon, which is Monday. In French, it's lundi, lune. Lune means moon. Once again, the same pattern. Som, Mangal. Mangal is Mars. In French, you have mardi, which is Tuesday. And Tuesday in English is from Tyr, Tyr. It's a Nordic god. Then Wednesday, Som, Mangal, Budh. Budh, it's Mercury, right? In French, you say mercredi, Mercury. Thursday is what? Som, Mangal, Budh. Guruvar, right? Guruvar is, it is Jupiter. Guru is Jupiter. Jupiter, who was Jupiter? Who was Jupiter? Well, it was Indra. Indra became Zeus. Zeus became Jupiter. Jupiter became Thor. Why is it called Thursday? And so on. I can give you the whole thing. The similarities in language, culture are striking. They're unmistakable. But you need something beyond that goes deeper than surface level analysis. Then you will see the shocking patterns emerge everywhere. So it tells you that this was all part of one culture long, long ago, which originated somewhere. And the question is where? And the white supremacists will claim that it all originated in white Europe, which is utter nonsense. All right? Okay. Nirvana Shanks says, who were the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire and how did they go from useful soldiers to causing problems? The Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire. The Janissaries is a very, bloody period of history. So it was like this. See, first of all, let's take a look at the region we are talking about, and then we will go into slightly more detail. Let's put the map on the screen. We're talking about Turkey, right? So Turkey, 1,000 years ago, there was no Turkish person there. No one spoke Turkish or practiced Islam, right? So what happened is around 1200 AD, the Turks were fleeing from the Mongols. The Turks used to live in Central Asia. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, not Tajikistan, okay? Not Tajikistan. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, all those stans, not the Indo-Iranian stan, which is Tajikistan, the other stans. And all of that, okay? So the Turks lived in this region, also in southern Russia. The Tatars were also Turks. And then the Mongol Empire erupted out of nowhere, and the Turks fled from the Mongols because the Mongols were an all-conquering power, and the Turks were frightened. So they fled westwards, and they came in the region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and they went southwards, and that's how they entered Anatolia. Anatolia is the major portion of Turkey, the Asiatic portion of Turkey. So the Turks entered this region, and they were nomads, used to fighting all the time. And they found this population of peaceful Greek people, civilized Greek people, and they smashed this population. And they took the land and they enslaved the people of the Greek origin people. And then they, perpetrated the standard Turkish atrocities and all, conversion by force and, thieving, kidnapping women and forcibly marrying them to Turks and that sort of thing. And that's how the Turks became white people, essentially Greek people. If you look at the genetics of Turkey, it's Greek genetics or some Armenian genetics. That's it. Very little Turkic genetics. So they essentially enslaved the local people and forced their women to marry Turks over and over again over God knows how many generations. And that's what happened. Now, the Ottoman Empire then, with the conquest of Constantinople, 1453, it became a thing, and then they became a powerful force, and they were an expansionist force. They expanded westwards, eastwards, and so on. They conquered the Baltic regions, and they enslaved the people there. And one of the means of subjugating these defeated populations was to extract what was called the blood tax. The blood tax. So every village, they will go to every village and they'll say that every year you will give us X number of boys, young boys, like less than 10 years old. You will give your young boys to us. Every village has a certain quota. Every year they need to provide a certain number of boys. Maybe it's 10 boys, maybe it's 20 boys, whatever it is. And these boys would be taken by force from their families. There's nothing the families could do. The boys would be taken under the tutelage of the Turks. They would be converted to Islam, circumcised, all that. And then they would be turned into soldiers. And the indoctrination, brainwashing was so thorough that they became the strongest, the most powerful fighting force of the Turks. The elite fighting force, the Janissaries. Right? Eventually they became so powerful that they caused political problems. And that's how power works. So that was the deal. It was the Devshirme system or something. It's called the blood tax system. Horrific thing that they did. They will steal boys from the local people and then use those boys after they grow up to oppress the locals. Because by that time they're fully Islamized and Turkicized. And then they would oppress their own people, their own families, their own villages and cities and countries. That's what they would do. Horrific. Well, that's part of Turkish history and culture. The system of the Janissaries, the blood tax. Vashisht says, how did the parliament come into existence in Britain? And when did its power become more than that of the British crown, the king or the queen? How did that happen? Right? Interesting question. So historically, before the Normans conquered England in 1066 AD, there was no parliament or any such thing. Before the Normans, you had the Anglo-Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons who ruled over these islands, the British islands, and they had a system. They had kings, obviously, and the kings would have a council of advisors, which was called the Wighton. Wighton Gamot was the meeting of the council of the king, that sort of thing. And that's where the real power lay, the king and their council of advisors. Then once the Normans took over, when William the Conqueror conquered England in the year 1066 AD, he smashed the existing system, destroyed it, and replaced it with the Norman system. And which eventually became what England is today, what Britain is today. So the king, William, and his descendants for a couple of centuries, they would have council of advisors themselves, which was called, I don't remember what it was called in Latin. And that's where the power lay. But eventually, by the 13th century or something, some kind of parliament had emerged, which was essentially the powerful people. They would be brought together in one place so that they could decide about the important things of the country. So it would be priests, which are cardinals and all that. And there would be some wealthy landowners and the nobles. So that was the kind of parliament you had. It was all entitled, privileged people. And they would come and decide about some minor affairs in the country. And they would, maybe make some decisions that would have some impact at a low level in the country. Then over time, the parliament became a more established thing. And then you would have then eventually you had a House of Lords and a House of Commons. The Lords were the old parliament, the priests and the aristocrats and the landed nobles, all of those people, those were the Lords. And then you had a House of Commons, which was the common people who had no nobility or any such thing, no privilege. And they also would send people, and that's how the parliament was divided into two houses, the House of Lords and the House of the Commons. And eventually, and slowly, over time, the parliament became gradually over time, more consequential, slightly more powerful over time. By the 14th, 15th century, the parliament had significant control over taxation, possibly, and taxation and legislation, right? But the ultimate power obviously lay in the crown, the king. Then there was a revolution. So then the parliament, obviously the nature of power is that you want more and more power. So there was a revolution in 1688. 1688, if I'm not mistaken, it was called the Glorious Revolution. Let's fact check my year. Do I remember it correctly? Was it the glorious thing in 1688? Glorious Revolution 1688. There was a glorious revolution in 1688, which saw the deposition of these kings, James and all, and different. I think it was a woman who came to power, who was put in power, who was a relative of James. and her husband was a foreigner. I don't remember the specific details. You can look it up. And that's where Parliament becomes more powerful than the king. 1688. And then the king becomes kind of a figurehead. So after the Glorious Revolution, Britain became a constitutional monarchy in which the king would give his rubber stamp approval to whatever Parliament said. And the king could not function without Parliament support, that sort of thing. So that caused a different kind of equilibrium. And today it is said that the monarchy is just a sort of figureheads, and they clearly don't really have any real power, but they still are extremely wealthy. So that's how it happened. It's a very gradual process that took roughly 1,000 years, maybe 800 years, that sort of thing. So that's how the power structure evolved in England and in Britain over a period of about 8-9 centuries. So, yeah. Okay, Ayush says, please tell us in detail about Rajputs, how Rajputs contained the Mughals and what sacrifices they made in doing so. Look, the Rajputs, Mughals was a much later period. When did Babur invade? When did Babur arrive in India? Let's find this. Babur was the first Mughal, right? Wasn't he? Babur, India. When did he? Founder of the Mughal Empire. When did he come to power? Which year? Let's quickly reference this untrustworthy source. Okay, 1526. 1526 is when Babur becomes king of a small part in a small region in northern India, right? 1526. But the Turkic and Arabic invasions started happening in the 700s, in the 8th century. That's a full 7 centuries before the Mughals become the power in India, right? In all these centuries, 7 centuries, the Turks were trying their best to invade and occupy India. The first part of India to fall to the Turks was Gandhar, which is now called Afghanistan, right? And it's the original Kashmir. What happened there, you saw later happen in Kashmir and other parts of India. So the Turks launched wave after wave after wave after wave of invasion of India. And they got some footholds here and there. They took Gandhar, yes. And from there then they used Gandhar as the launch pad for launching further invasions into India. The Ghores and Ghaznavis and all, they came from Gandhar, right, which was turned into Afghanistan. And who fought? It was the Indian kings and kingdoms of that time. So if you look at the 7th century, 8th century, 10th century, 11th century, the term Rajput did not exist. This term came into existence much later. It's interesting, it would be interesting for historians to look at when does this term first appear in the historical record, or Rajput or Rajyaputra, right? So when we say Rajput today, we are referring to the kingdoms and the kings of those times, the monarchies of those times, from the 8th century to the 14th, 15th, 16th, whatever century. And who were these Rajputs? They did not call themselves Rajput at the time, right? So who were these, what we call Rajputs today? Who were these people? These were the ancient ruling dynasties of India, dating back to the late Vedic age. So they were in charge of ruling various parts of India. You had kingdoms. There were times when the whole of the subcontinent was united under a single emperor, a single empire, and there were times of fragmentation, which is what was the case when the Turks started invading India. So the Rajputs, who we now call the Rajputs, they were the Chauhans and all the various, not just the Chauhans, so many famous surnames, as we know. All these kingdoms, they fought. But the problem was that they were separated. They were not under a single unified command like what you have in an empire. So they all fought. They made tremendous sacrifices. They repelled the Turks. You know, we talk about the Hunnic invasions because it is not controversial, right? There were wave after wave after wave of Hunnic invasions of India. The Huns tried their best to invade India for like 2 centuries. And once again, Gandhar was the first part of India to fall to the Huns. Okay, and it was the Gupta emperors who repulsed the Hunnic invasions, especially Skandagupta. He spent his whole life fighting off the Huns. And eventually, after his death, the Huns were able to, capture significant portions of India and settle down. And they became Indians, of course. So the Hunnic invasion period took like 2-3 centuries. The Turkic invasions that went on for 7 centuries before they made actual progress, real progress in the form of the Mughal Empire. Right? So that 7 centuries of resistance was done by the Rajputs, but you will not find any of this given in any form of any sort of detail in your textbooks, because then you will kind of be proud of your country, right? But we are supposed to be portrayed as a country of losers. That's why our history textbooks only talk about the glories of Babur and or whatnot, this little chieftain who came from Andijan in Uzbekistan. But all the centuries of resistance to the Turks, very little is mentioned. Bapa Rawal, he's kind of semi-legendary, semi-mythical person in the imagination of lots of Indians. Most Indians probably don't even know Bapa Rawal existed and what he did, and he reconquered many parts of what is today Pakistan from the Turks. But eventually he also passed away and things went the way it is. So the resistance was fierce. It was centuries of resistance. Tremendous sacrifices were made, and eventually the Rajput kingdoms of the later period, like 16th century, 17th century, they were vassalized by the Mughals. And that's why lots of people like to say that the Rajputs, they became what? Allies of the Mughals. Let me tell you something. What happened after 1857? Everyone was vassalized by the British, right? But nobody taunts those. Nobody taunts those princely states and their kings whose descendants still live among us today. Nobody taunts them today. They also, you could say, sold their country because you would, if becoming a vassal means you sold your country off. Well, what the hell happened there? You see, when the occupying powers force is overwhelming, then this sort of thing happens. So eventually, after 7-8 centuries of resistance, the Rajputs eventually became vassalized by Jalaluddin. Right? Jalaluddin, what's his name? Akbar Jalaluddin. That sort of thing. But the sacrifices were immense, and the toll that they paid was horrific. And yeah, so that's the deal. But this period of Indian history is not examined by historians, and there's very little of it in your textbooks, and that's why all these various misinterpretations exist about the Rajputs. Nirvana Shanks says, what was the Taiping Rebellion and what beliefs of Hong Xiuquan started it? Hong Xiuquan. The Taiping Rebellion. I mean, China has these horrifying civil wars where 20-30 million people will die just like that. The Taiping Rebellion starts around 1850 or something. You can look up the exact dates yourself if you are interested. Around 1850, the Taiping Rebellion starts. And it went on until about 1865. About 14-15 years it went on. And the death toll was in excess of 20 million. So what was the deal? So the rebellion, the leader of the rebellion was this individual called Hong Xiuquan. And he aspired to become a high-ranking Chinese bureaucrat. And the Chinese used to have this examination system. So you have to sit for the exam. It's a very, very comprehensive exam, and it's very hard to pass, very difficult to crack the exam. And I think this guy, he tried 2-3 times and he failed every time. And he eventually became disenchanted, disillusioned. And then he developed delusions of grandeur. So he declared that I am the younger brother of Jesus Christ. And he became and he started propounding a new religion, which was apparently a combination of Christianity with some local Chinese beliefs. And he said that the Chinese society needs to be reformed, and land and wealth needs to be redistributed among the poor. Very, very nice thing to say. It was like kind of a communist propaganda kind of thing. And he amassed a lot of followers. And he wanted to overthrow the government of China, the Qing Empire, the Qing Dynasty. And he wanted to overthrow Confucianism, the belief system, which is an atheistic belief system in China, and Buddhism, whatever. And he wanted to replace it with his weird form of religion, which was Christianity mixed with some other beliefs, whatever, I don't know, whatever it was. So this was the attempt to impose Christianity on China. And because of his what he said, that the land and wealth needs to be distributed, that sort of thing. If I come to power, I'll do it. That's why he amassed a lot of followers. And a significant part of southeastern China came under this guy's dominion, Hong Xiuquan. And obviously the empire will not tolerate that. So that caused a war between the two factions, between the empire and the forces of Hong Xiuquan. And this war, the civil war, went on for about 14, 15 years. And it caused tremendous suffering, famine, massacres, whatnot, all of that. The total death toll is in excess probably of 20 million. So eventually Hong Xiuquan was, whether he committed suicide or killed or whatever, but he died. And his son also was dealt with. And this was ended. So that was the Taiping Rebellion in very short. It was a disaster for China. It caused tremendous, structural and other issues. It significantly weakened the Qing Empire. And then you had another rebellion, another revolt. Let's discuss that. So Yajnavalkya says, what were the causes of the Dungan Revolt 1862 to 1877 in China that occurred against the Qing Dynasty? How did Zuo Zongtang manage to suppress this revolt? So Zuo Zongtang was the Qing Empire's principal general who fought against the people who caused the revolt. What was this Dungan Revolt? So you have the Taiping Rebellion that is now in its last phase, and then you have a Dungan Revolt that starts. The Taiping Rebellion was in the southeast of China. The Dungan Revolt was in the northwest of China. Totally different, like diametrically opposite places, right? The Dungan Revolt is also called the Hui Muslim Rebellion. It was the attempt by Muslims in present-day Xinjiang and also other provinces. Xinjiang came in later. Other provinces of China, western provinces, northern western provinces of China, the Muslims who lived there, they wanted to establish a new empire there, right? And it all started with massacres of Han Chinese by the Hui Muslims. So the Hui Muslims started this revolt against the country, against the empire. They started by massacring lots and lots of Han Chinese civilians. And then the Han Chinese started, organizing, and they fought back. And that's how the whole revolt started. And there were suspicions that the Taiping Rebellion had a role, the rebels of the Taiping Rebellion, the leaders, possibly may have had a role in assisting the Hui Muslims who were revolting also by 1862. So they wanted to create a separate emirate or kingdom carved out of Chinese territory, and that's what was the cause of the Dungan Revolt or Hui Muslim Revolt. And Zuo Zongtang, he played a sophisticated game. Obviously, he did use military force, very powerful, very organized military force. He had a pretty modernized military for that time, very well organized, very disciplined, very professional. So he took that into the battlefield on lots of occasions. Lots of battles happened against the Hui Muslims, and he crushed them. But he also played a political game in which he gave some inducements to some factions of the Hui Muslims to come on the Chinese side, and they would be elevated to high positions and given various inducements. So by that game of divide and rule, that strategy, he was able to weaken the rebellion, and eventually he was able to defeat it militarily. Once again, tremendous death toll, 10-20 million. Very easily that sort of death toll happened, and entire provinces were like 60-70% depopulated because of this. So the Chinese faced two rebellions, one after the other. There was a period where both were happening at the same time. And this caused a great amount of weakening of the Qing Empire, which eventually fell around 1911 or something. Okay, two questions about the same topic essentially. Ayush says, why didn't we lose our polytheism despite being under a millennium of foreign occupation, and those barbarians tried their best to do it? After reading The Darkening Age, kudos, you read The Darkening Age. All right. It's a book I have recommended on multiple occasions. So after reading The Darkening Age, I discovered that Europe lost its majority culture in just 4 centuries, the old Indo-European culture. And that too didn't happen with any very glorious resistance. So the resistance from Europe was not that significant. And in a matter of 4 centuries, the Indo-European religion was wiped out, the culture was wiped out, and superimposed with Christianity. Christianity became the dominant religion. It was forced onto Europe. And Amisha says, why was Christianity so successful in eradicating the indigenous religious traditions of Europe? So essentially, we need to contrast what happened in Europe vis-a-vis what happened in India. So in Europe, you had the very rapid Christianization of Europe, a complete destruction of the indigenous culture and belief systems. And in India, you had 1,000 years of foreign occupation in various parts of India. It's not like for 1,000 years the whole of India was under foreign occupation, but over time it was a creeping thing. It was a creeping advance of foreign occupiers. It starts with Gandhar, and then it goes further eastwards and southwards. And eventually you have the Mughal Empire during Aurangzeb's time, which conquered much of the subcontinent. And then you have the Europeans who came in. So eventually the Mughal Empire was destroyed by the Marathas, the great Marathas, who liberated India from the Turks. But the Marathas themselves had their empire did not last very long because of various political reasons, infighting and all that. And the British took advantage of that, and they created the British Raj and so on. Right? So India was under British occupation for about 2.5 centuries. And we were under Turkic occupation, various parts of India, for about, 7, 8 centuries, right? That sort of thing. Various parts of India, if you include Gandhar. So, why were the occupiers of India, foreign occupiers, the Abrahamic occupiers of India, why were they not able to destroy our polytheistic culture and civilization? It still exists in some shape or form. But Europe, it happened so fast. What was the reason? Why did it happen so easily in Europe? In Persia also, but not in India. What was the deal? So you see, it's like this. In Europe, the kings themselves became Christians, and then they forced their people to become Christian, because they saw Christianity as something that will strengthen their hold on power, because now it's just one militarized structure of priests that control the religion, as opposed to a completely decentralized religion that you had. So in Europe, one after the other, various kings and emperors started adopting Christianity. And because they control power, which means they have the monopoly in violence, that's why they were able to subjugate the people very rapidly. And the church was a very powerful force in that sense. And they employed all kinds of brutal tactics. So you have kings like Charlemagne, who launched the Northern Crusades, which is brutalization of the people and forcing them to give up their religion and adopt Christianity, that sort of thing. So in Europe, you had kings and emperors who themselves became Christian and then forced it down the throats of the populations. Happened over a period of time. Like you say, it's 4 centuries. So once you do a coup essentially at the very top, then it's very easy to do it, to project it downwards. The same thing happened in Persia also. Kings very rapidly became Islamic, and that's how Persia also very quickly, the population was made to adopt Islam, to convert to Islam, most of the population. When it comes to India, the kings never became, they never converted to foreign religions. The kings kept on fighting. We speak about the Rajput resistance, which I took 2-3 questions ago. Well, if those Rajput kings from the 8th century to the 15th century, if they had decided that let's convert to the religion that the Turks have brought, and let's force our population to convert to, it would have happened very rapidly. Understand that. But the kings themselves decided that we will not give up our culture. We'll fight and we'll die if required. And that's why it did not succeed. Once again, when the British occupied India, they brought in their legions of missionaries, right? But even though a lot after 1857, every single Indian kingdom became vassalized. Every Indian kingdom became vassalized after 1857. But not a single king or queen converted to Christianity, as far as we know. There may have been some crypto converts here and there, possibly, I'm not sure. But the overwhelming majority of our kings and queens did not convert to Christianity, despite despite the British having brought in millions of, not millions, but legions of missionaries with the express purpose of converting Indians. Right? So because of this resistance from India, because our culture, our religion, our civilization is so deep-rooted, it's thousands, tens of thousands of years old. We have had an evolving form of the same culture since about, 80,000 years before today, essentially. It's so deep-rooted. That's why it could not work. But today you will see that if the same efforts continue, today we don't have kings, right? But we have politicians. Now, do you know of any politicians who have converted or converts, even crypto converts, and they are pushing the agenda, top to bottom? It happens, it works when the push comes from the top and it goes downwards, because the entire might of the state apparatus is used to convert. Right? So as long as we had kings in India, even if it was vassalized kings under the British or for some time under the Mughal Empire, even the vassalized kings did not convert to the foreign religions. And because the conversion did not happen at the top, there was no top to bottom push, top to down push, using the full might of the state apparatus, military, bureaucracy, everything to convert. And that's why Indians did not convert. Thanks to our kings and queens, even those who had become vassalized, even they did not give up. Is that the case today? Ask yourselves. Is that the case today? Today you don't have kings, you have politicians, and what are they doing? Some of them, hypothetically. So now, today, our culture is under real threat. It's under siege. Yajnavalkya says, why did the monotheisms that form a majority of the world today emerge out of tiny regions of West Asia and only in the last 2,000, 3,000 years? In the 10,000 and the 100,000 plus years of existence of Homo Sapiens in such a relatively large world, how is it the case that monotheism never developed independently in any other region of the world except the Israel-Palestine region? Interesting question, right? See, monotheistic religions, if you see, they tend to develop in desert regions. Wherever you have lush forests and abundance, and the land gives you plenty of resources, you will find that people will have polytheistic beliefs, because life is not hard and everything is beautiful, everything is divine. So you will see divinity in trees, you will see divinity in mountains, in hills, you will see divinity in animals, you will see divinity in each other. And that's why wherever you have a land of plenty and abundance, you will have polytheistic religions that develop from in these regions. But where you have a land of scarcity, a desert region, where you have to fight for every morsel to eat, you have to fight and kill just to put food on the table, that's a region, that's a land of scarcity. And somehow it's in these places that monotheistic religions develop. I mean, even if you look at Mongolia, you could say it's a really harsh land, very harsh climate. And there are times in winter where, food is not abundant at all. You have to fight for that. And yet Mongolia is full of forests. It has the steppe, of course, but it also has rivers and lakes and forests. So Mongolia also developed a polytheistic religion, what today is called Tengrism, based on the name of one god. But it's a polytheistic religion. So wherever you have a land of scarcity, that's where a monotheistic religion develops somehow. Because there is no divinity anywhere. So you have to invent some god, one god, possibly. Possibly that's the case. So that's why monotheism came out of this region. The Israel-Palestine, the Israel region, the deserts of Arabia, that region. I mean, you could claim that even Egypt is mostly desert, but Egyptian civilization flourished on the banks of the Nile, which is a region of plenty. And that's why they had a polytheistic culture. So polytheism emerges from lands of plenty. Monotheism comes from desert regions. Interesting question by Feminist Slayer. Can you explain the historical significance of Sitting Bull, especially his leadership in the Battle of Little Bighorn and his role in resisting US government policies against Native Americans? Okay, we'll go into who Sitting Bull was and what his significance was. But all of this, what we're going to discuss, it is in the context of the war against the Native Americans. The American Indian Wars, it's called, I think. American Indian Wars, I think it is called. It was, see, the Europeans, it's the French, the Spanish, the French, and the British. They came from Europe, they discovered this land. They knew this land existed because of, Columbus and all. And then they started colonizing the land. The Nazis, Nazis are Nazis are evil. Do we all agree? Nazi Germany was evil. What was the deal with Nazi Germany? What was one of the objectives of Nazi Germany? One of the objectives of Nazi Germany was to conquer more land for German people, Lebensraum, a large region of land where only Germans can be settled, so that Germans will have more land to live in. That was one of the objectives of the Nazi government, right? To find more land, if necessary, clear that land of the original people and settle Germans there. Very evil, right? Very, very evil. Nazi level evil. Now, what were the Spanish, French, and English doing in America when they started conquering and colonizing? They were doing exactly that. They wanted this huge land for themselves. So what do? You exterminate the natives. You genocide the natives. You do this on a scale Nazis could not even have imagined. That's what happened. And the American Indian Wars are that. The genocide of the natives. That's what these nations in the Americas are. Settler colonial nations that have been built on stolen land as a consequence of genocide and slavery. And genocide on a scale that Nazi Germany could not imagine. So once the Anglos started settling in the eastern part of North America, they started expanding westwards, the great western frontier. And wherever they went, they encountered native people. So what do? You want the land. So you defeat them militarily. If they fight, you fight back. And once you subjugate them, you massacre as many as possible. Whoever is left, you sign a treaty. So it becomes legal. You sign a treaty that relegates the survivors to a reservation. A reservation, which is like a concentration camp, essentially. It's land where there's nothing available. You find the most barren land and settle people there. Settle the natives there. And the rest of the land becomes yours. So you did a fair treaty. See, we signed a treaty, you see. It's legal. We did not do this by force. We had a treaty. And they did this over and over again with various tribes that they subjugated. And from the 1700s all the way to the beginning of the 1900s, the Americans did that. The Anglos. From the 1600s, 1700s, all the way to until the end of the 19th century, this went on. The American Indian Wars. Okay? It was the systematic genocide and of the Native American people, the theft of their land, and the relegation of the survivors to essentially concentration camps. Small parcels of land which would be given, where there's nothing really of use, and you settle them there, and that's where natives still live today. Whoever has survived. Right? That's the deal. So now that you understand what happened, what was done, and how this nation of the United States was created, right? Now let's talk about Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull was one of the chiefs of the Lakota tribe. It's a plains tribe. Plains Indians, they were called. Now what the plains, the Great Plains, the flat plains of the Americas. So let me give you, let's put that on the screen so that you understand the geographical extent of the lands of the Plains Indians. Okay, Plains Indians. Indians. What was their territory like? Territory. Let's go to images. Hopefully there's a map somewhere. And we're talking about not just, now we're talking. Look at this here. It's actually even bigger than that. The actual extent was bigger than that. They're just showing some part of it. It encompasses the United States and Canada, and it goes all the way north. It goes all the way north to further north than what is being shown here. Let me see. Do I have? I think all of this history is nicely suppressed. Nicely suppressed. Anyway, they had a vast territory. Even if you look at just the US, it's a massive territory in the United States. And it was more than what's being shown over here. So that was the domain of the Plains Indians, and they were slowly, systematically, deprived of their land. Now let's once again go back and let's see Sitting Bull. So he was a leader of the Lakota. That's what he looked like. This is an artificially colorized photograph of him. This is his face. That's what he looked like. And he spent his entire life fighting the invaders. His entire life fighting the invaders. That's what he did. And so in the 1870s somewhere, he fought against the American invaders, the Anglo invaders. And there was this very famous battle called the Battle of Little Bighorn, in which there was this individual called George Custer. George Custer. Let's Google that guy. He was the leader of the invasive band, George Custer. Lieutenant Colonel was he? Whatever. George Custer. And he launched an invasion of Lakota land. And the battle happened, Battle of Little Bighorn, in which the Americans, the Anglos, suffered a catastrophic defeat. So this was Custer, who maybe was over-ambitious, or maybe he was overconfident. And he and his forces were wiped out in the Battle of the Little Bighorn. But eventually, the Americans won, and the Lakota were also deprived of their land. And Sitting Bull was sent into exile in Canada or wherever. And he spent his entire life, the rest of his life also, in some way or the other, opposing the invaders and occupiers of his land. So that's the historical significance of Sitting Bull. There were so many resistance fighters from the Native Americans who all met, not a nice end at the hands of the Americans. And Sitting Bull, I think he died at an older age in exile in Canada, away from his land, away from his people. And that's the deal. So the story of the Native Americans is a horrific, tragic story, a story of genocide and a story of their land being stolen to create an artificial nation. Okay? And this was done along the same lines of what the Nazis wanted to do in Europe, but on a scale that the Nazis could not imagine. That vast, a continent-sized scale. Anonymous scientist says, according to Herodotus, Necho II, an Egyptian ruler, sent Phoenician mariners to find a sea route around Africa, then known as Libya. And the Phoenicians succeeded in finding a sea route through the Cape of Good Hope to India. Or maybe not to India. He's not mentioning India here. So why do we give credit to the Portuguese there then? Well, you see, the Phoenicians were not Christians. They were not white Europeans. And neither was Necho II. These were brown-skinned people. They were not Christian. And that's why they must not get any credit. See, that's how the world works today. All credit is given to Europeans and Christians. Especially what happened in the past 500 years, all the credit has to be given to Europeans. If the Europeans discovered arithmetic in the decimal system through the Arabs, which came from the Indians, the best they will do is give a little bit of credit to the Arabs and then just digest all of that and say that we discovered everything. So that's what the Europeans have been doing the past 500 years. So look, Vasco da Gama discovered something, but it was known for a very, very long time, all of that. Just because a white Christian guy discovered it doesn't mean that he was the first person to discover something. People lived at the Cape of Good Hope. They knew that something existed on the other side, on both sides. Right? In Eastern Africa, you had Indians who lived all over the place. So this is This is the consequence of the Eurocentric world that we live in today. The Occidental centric, the Western centric world that we live in today, where all the credit has to be given to Europeans and white people. Right, next. Somi says, how did the Vikings suddenly rise in the 9th century despite being isolated and insignificant prior to the Viking Age? Okay, let's go to the map to understand what are we talking about here. Yes, you are right. The Viking Age suddenly begins around the 8th, 9th century. What happened suddenly? How did they become so significant? Let's go to the map. We'll go to the Viking area. So we're talking about Western Europe here. And we have this bunch of islands called today the United Kingdom, which was the British Islands, the English Islands. And to the northeast of that, you have the Scandinavian region, which is Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Okay, you have Sweden here, you have Norway here, and you have Denmark here. The Vikings were mostly Danes and Norwegians. The Scandinavian people, they were called Vikings. So you can see that between Scandinavia and the British Islands, you have the North Sea. And it's pretty vast actually. If you look at the distance, it's not small, it's not insignificant. It's about more than 500 kilometers of open sea and pretty rough sea and very cold sea. So back in the day, people just had boats, right? People just had boats. So so people who lived in Scandinavia would not even know that 550, 60 kilometers away, there's this bunch of islands. Or if they knew, then it would be some faraway mythical place, if the existence of England was known. So that's how it was. The distances were very immense and the technology did not exist. Then how did the Viking Age erupt out of nowhere? As always, technological advance. The Vikings developed longboats. Longboats were essentially small ships that could be crewed by 10, 20 people who would have sails as well as oars. And they were pretty hardy. They could survive the rough seas. And secondly, the Vikings discovered some sunstone or something. So in this part of the world, Northern Europe, the Eastern Atlantic region, the North Sea region, the climate is terrible in the sense that it's always cloudy. It's always overcast. It's raining all the time. So you hardly see the sun. And if you don't see the sun, then how will you navigate properly? So the Vikings discovered some stone, some translucent stone that if you put against the sky, even if it's overcast, you can kind of detect where the sun is. And using that stone and using the long ships, the Viking long ships, they were able to start reaching England. And that's where the Viking Age begins. And where does the Viking Age begin? It begins, let's find the place again. Okay, so let's zoom out. We're talking about the United Kingdom. Now let's slowly zoom in. Here you have the city of London, right? We're going to go north. London, Cambridge, Manchester, we go further north. We don't go all the way to Edinburgh, but we kind of come here. This place is called Lindisfarne. It's also called Holy Island. And this is the first place where a Viking landing happened as far as I know. May have happened elsewhere, but this is the first properly recorded incident. So the Vikings came here and they sacked the Lindisfarne Abbey and they stole all the gold and valuables. And then they discovered, we can reach England, we can sack these weak people, these people and steal their land and valuables. And there's a lot of good, valuable land there where we can do farming and so on. So the word spread among the Vikings, among the Scandinavians, and they started organizing these raiding parties. And eventually the raiding parties became very significant and they started conquering England. And that's how the Viking Age began. It all began with technological advances. All empires that conquer, they conquer because of technological advances and technological advantages they develop over the people they conquer. Samarth says, we're going to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Please explain the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, Samarth Pramanik. Okay, so we're talking about the Cold War. The Second World War ended in 1945, and then the world was very rapidly divided into two camps. The US-led camp with its vassals and the USSR-led camp with its vassals. And the Americans, they were the country that first developed the atomic bomb. And by the 1960s, they had about, 25,000 nuclear warheads, including 3,000 plus deployed in Europe against the USSR. Imagine more than roughly 25,000 nuclear warheads the Americans had. And more than 3,000 of these were deployed in Europe, aimed at the USSR. And at that time, the Soviets had also, developed atomic weapons. And the Soviets had maybe 4,000 nuclear warheads only, a fraction of what the Americans had. And they feared that, because of the American nuclear warheads and missiles on European soil, very close to our borders, pointed at us, it's a huge problem. We have to do something about this. So the Soviets dispatched a shipment, or maybe multiple shipments of nuclear-tipped missiles to Cuba. Where is Cuba? In case some of you don't know, let's go to Cuba. All right. So let's cross the Atlantic, and we are talking about Hispaniola. I'm sorry, this is not Hispaniola. This is Hispaniola. This is Cuba. Cuba is in the Caribbean region, just south of Florida. The distance between Florida and Cuba is what? 230 or so kilometers. So this is Cuba. And Cuba used to be a US vassal, but then there was a revolution in Cuba and Fidel Castro came to power. And Fidel Castro was a leftist and he aligned himself with the USSR. So the USSR sent nuclear-tipped missiles to Cuba, and these were then deployed in Cuba, aimed at the US, obviously. If the US can position nuclear weapons in Europe aimed at the USSR, why can't the USSR pay them back in kind by deploying missiles in Cuba? So the Americans had these U-2 spy plane program. They had this extremely high altitude spy aircraft called U-2 aircraft. They would fly above the range of any known missile at the time. And they would have these overflights over Russia, over China, also over Cuba. And they would take photographs of what was happening on the ground. And during these overflights, they discovered that there are missiles, probably Soviet missiles, in Cuba. And that's where the alarm bells start ringing. And eventually Kennedy addresses his nation and says that there is this threat to the US. The Soviets have deployed nuclear missiles aimed at us on Cuba. And this led to a period of extremely tense diplomacy and a confrontation between the navies and air forces of the two nations. There was an incident where a Soviet submarine in the Gulf of Mexico, it was patrolling there. And the American warships detected it and started dropping depth charges at this submarine. A depth charge is a bomb that is designed to detonate at a certain depth below the surface of the sea. So you can set it to detonate at 50 meters below the sea surface, maybe 70 meters, 100 meters, 200, 300, whatever. You can set the detonation depth of this bomb. So these are called depth charges. So the Soviet submarine was there. Diesel submarine, I believe, not nuclear submarine, diesel submarine, and the American warships started detonating depth charges to drive this submarine to the surface. The submarine surfaced, and then there was an American helicopter hovering over it at a height of about 10-15 meters, and they started firing rounds at the submarine, firing machine gun rounds at the submarine. Now the protocol was that you don't do live firing on the opponent unless there's a war. So the captain of the submarine thought that World War III has broken out, and he had a nuclear-tipped torpedo, and he wanted to use it. But there was a political officer. So generally what happens in a submarine, what used to happen was that the submarine's captain and his second in command had to agree. Both of them had to agree. If both agreed, they could launch a nuclear weapon. But on this particular submarine, there was a high-ranking Soviet political officer also who was there. And that person disagreed. That's why it did not happen. So the world came to the brink of nuclear war. Eventually, a diplomatic consensus, settlement was reached. The Soviets agreed to withdraw the nuclear missiles from Cuba, and the Americans secretly agreed to withdraw American nuclear missiles from Turkey that were aimed at the USSR. Today you have American nuclear missiles in Turkey, aimed at Russia. So that's kind of what this Cuban Missile Crisis was. The US president was John F. Kennedy at the time. It was 62, not 63. So yeah, that's what it was in brief. It is probably the closest the world came to a nuclear exchange. So the Soviets had about 3,000 plus nuclear warheads. The Americans had 25,000 roughly nuclear warheads. And that would have been a catastrophe if a nuclear exchange had happened. Advait Ashwani says, what horrors did Belgium do in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo? So today's Congo region, what happened there? Once again, we go to the map. So first of all, we understand what this place is. It's in Africa. We go to Africa. Where is the DRC? Look at this place over here, DRC. So this is the Congo region. And the Belgians occupied this region from the 1880s until the 1910s, 1920s. Belgium's King Leopold essentially owned this land, okay, and they extracted the land of everything of any value that existed here, mainly rubber plantations. Okay, so now we understand. We'll close the map. So Congo is rich in forests. So the Belgians planted rubber trees everywhere, rubber plantations. And they enslaved the locals. The locals all became the property of the king. The local people who lived there became the property of the king. And they would then have to do whatever they were told by their Belgian overlords. So there was a major Belgian military presence there and a major Belgian missionary presence there. So the people were enslaved. They were all put to work on the rubber plantations and various mines or whatever, for whatever other mineral wealth, etc. Congo had. So rubber plantations, mines, all of that, that's where the people were made to work forcibly. Children were made to work. Child labor, slave labor, doesn't matter. It's good as long as the Belgian king, profits. So the Belgians were enslaved. The Congolese, the people of Congo were enslaved. Now what happened? They were brutalized. Many of them were overworked. Many of them were worked to death. And every slave was given a daily quota that you need to bring this amount of produce or material to your white boss every day. And if there was a shortfall of even a little bit, then they would meet brutal punishments. One of the common punishments was to chop off the person's hand. And sometimes they would not chop the guy's hands off, they would chop the hands of his kids. Right? And this was widespread. Brutal treatment. So today, in the 20th century, at least in Belgium, there was this famous chocolate that you could buy. What was the chocolate? It was hands. Cut hands. Would you like to see? It's true. I'm not making it up. Okay, let's see. So one is that, another is a tête de nègre, which we'll talk about. Okay, Belgian chocolate hands, chocolate Antwerp hands, whatever they call. Look at this. Look at this. I think it's still available. This is, essentially all those hands of the Africans that chopped off. Look at this now. Look at this. This blatant racism still continues. Look here. Can you see children with their hands chopped off? This is what Belgium did. This is just one example of what Belgium did. See, these are children. Children with their arms, with their hands chopped off, legs, hands as well as feet chopped off. And they celebrated this through these chocolates. They still do. Now I think it's called Antwerp chocolate hands or whatever. But this is how they celebrated this. There is another very famous chocolate confectionery that was available in Europe in the 20th century. It was called Tête de Nègre. Tête de Nègre bonbon. Look at this. Heads. Now it's called Tête au chocolat, and it's very tasty. And now it is not shaped like the head of a person, but it still has this vaguely head-like shape. As a child living in Europe in the 1980s, I also ate some of these chocolates without knowing what it was at the time. It was very tasty. Yeah. So, what was the brutality that was done to the Africans? They were enslaved, they were worked to death, there were brutal punishments, hands chopped off, feet chopped off, children with arms and limbs amputated, people killed, people executed for showing the slightest disobedience, children and families kidnapped and placed in internment or concentration camps, sexual abuse, widespread sexual abuse by the Belgians, brutal, horrific abuse by the Belgians, and the destruction of the local culture and the imposition of Christianity in a systematic manner. All of this was done by Belgium between the 1880s and the 1910s or 1920s. Yeah, good fun, wasn't it? For the Belgians, not for the natives. Okay, Yajnavalkya says, in pre-modern times, did China and Europe have thousands of endogamous jatis, not to be confused with varnas, but jatis, as we had in India? So even today, people are kind of vaguely aware of jati. But we had this extremely intricate, super complicated system of tens of thousands of jatis in India. Small clan-like communities where people would marry within the community with a set of rules. And you would not marry outside, that sort of thing. It emerged maybe during the Gupta Empire period or something like that, perhaps. So we had these thousands of endogamous jatis in India. Did the Chinese have it? Did the Europeans have it? The Chinese had a 4-layered caste system. What? I mean, what is this guy saying? Pagal ho gaya. What is he saying? Let me show you something, my friends. China. Google it yourself if you want to. China for occupations, not occupation, occupations. Let's ask Wikipedia what it has to say. Okay? 4 categories of the people. An occupation classification used in China, ancient China, by Confucian or legalist scholars as far as the late Qing Dynasty and part of the social structure and so on, so on, so on. From 1046 to 256 BC. So what was the division? The Shi or the warrior nobles, later on gentry scholars. The Nong is the peasant farmers. The Gong is the artisans and craftsmen. And the Shang, the merchants and traders. So you had 4 classes or castes of society in traditional Chinese society. So you would not really have, they did not have really this system of jatis. They had this 4-tiered caste system or class system in China. And people would marry, typically you marry among your social equals, right? That's what society has always shown. Whenever you have a highly organized society, which is typical of all civilizations, advanced civilizations, you have a highly organized and stratified society. Every civilization has this feature. So generally people will marry people who are their social equals. They won't marry down, you won't marry up generally. So you, that's what you would have in China. Of course, there would be some people who would have practiced a certain skill or a certain trade for God knows, centuries, generations. They would probably want to, there would have been some cases where you had some sort of endogamy. But in China, generally, you had these 4 classes or 4 castes, and people would marry within the caste. That was the situation. In Europe, what was the situation? Europe was a feudal society. So you had the king at the top. Then you had the aristocracy or nobility, which is the king and his vassals, the people with the means to do violence. Then you had the clergy, the church people, and then you had the peasants. Eventually, a new class emerged, which is the merchants. So you had 3, 4, 5 different classes in Europe also. And people would only marry within their own class. But they also did not have this jati system. They had, I mean, if you look at English surnames, Smith, Fletcher, Thatcher, Hatcher, whatever. These are all occupation-based surnames. But they did not. They would probably marry among their own class. So they did not have the jati system the way you had in India for about 1500 years. So yeah, China was different. Europe was different. Japan also had its own system. Okay, we'll not go there today. But yeah, it was different from the Indian jati system, which was very, very complex. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of jatis. Okay, Amisha says, what was religion like in ancient Persia before Zoroastrianism? Very simple answer. Vedic religion. That was it. Okay, don't believe me, right? Let's see what twisted version of my answer Wikipedia will give you, or Google will give you, okay? So let's go to Google. Okay, what was the religion of Persia before? Let's ask them. What was the religion of Persia before there you have it, Zoroastrianism. Let's see what Google's AI says. Before Zoroastrianism, the Persians followed the ancient Indo-Iranian religion, a shared ancestor of both the Vedic religion and the religion of the early Iranian. What utter nonsense. This polytheistic tradition worshipped so when I say utter nonsense, it means that it's an ancestor of the Vedic religion. What absolute nonsense. The Vedic religion was the ancestral religion of all of these things. So this polytheistic tradition worshipped multiple deities with Ahura Mazda. How can Ahura Mazda exist before Zoroastrianism? See, this is complete contradictory nonsense. And Mitra being prominent figures, worship of fire and blah blah, Soma, Homa, worship of other gods. This ancient faith was a common ancestor of the Vedic religion of India and the ancient beliefs of the Iranian peoples. What evidence do you have to support this? Nothing. Absolute nothing. Lies. Shared root with Vedic religion. See, they don't want to say it was the Vedic religion, but the truth is that even through these distortions you can see it was the Vedic religion. And if you go to Wikipedia, it will have a different version of the same nonsense. What evidence do they have that there was an ancestor of the Vedic religion anywhere? Show me evidence, not someone's claim or a consensus of professors. I don't want a consensus. I want evidence. Hard, undeniable evidence, not someone's opinion. Oh, so-and-so eminent professor said that and 7 other eminent professors agreed. I don't care about anyone's opinions, no matter how eminent they may be in someone's opinion. Again, opinion. I want hard evidence. What was the religion of Persia before Zoroastrianism? If there was a religion, was it the ancestor of Vedic Hinduism or was it Vedic Hinduism itself? So then the question is, what was the ancestor of Vedic Hinduism? Do we have an answer? There was nothing. It was just Vedic Hinduism and the pre-Vedic Hinduism. But it was all, it would be categorized as Hinduism only, if you want to use the term Hinduism like we do today. So the ancient religion in Persia before Zarathustra emerged was the old Indo-Iranian Vedic religion. Okay, long question here by UMax. In May 2025, a paper was published in Nature showing that ancient DNA revealed 3,000 years of genetic continuity in the Northern Iranian Plateau from the Copper Age to the Sassanid Empire with no evidence of steppe migration into Iran. No Aryan invasion. Oh my God. According to the steppe theory, it was earlier invasions, now it's migrations. Migrations into Iran, according to the steppe theory, from Central Asia should have occurred about 1000 BC or 1500 BC. Yeah, same Aryan invasion simultaneously in India and Persia. That's the claim. However, the study found no such gene flow, sadly, tragically. This is significant because the steppe theory claims that both Indo-Aryans and Iranians migrated from Central Asia between 1200 BC to 1000 BC or 1500 BC to 1000 BC, whatever. Yet the new findings show no Sintashta or steppe ancestry in the Iron Age samples, which presents a major challenge to the steppe theory. I hope you've read the paper. While it does not directly address the debate, the genetic results clearly indicate the absence of steppe admixture in Iron Age Iran. No matter how you try to spin this theory, Aryan invasion theory or Aryan migration theory or tourism theory or whatever, picnic theory, no matter what distorted, twisted interpretation you create, that people came from the steppe, well, eventually the truth will come out. I haven't read this paper, but you clearly have summarized it properly. I will look into it. So clearly, this is another blow to this Aryan invasion migration claim. And the crux of the matter of this Aryan invasion claim or migration claim is that Sanskrit and Hinduism came to India and Persia from outside of India, from Central Asia. Well, prove it. Prove it. What proof do you have beyond someone's opinion? Nothing. So this, yeah, and because there is no proof of this, that's why they've brought the genetic angle in. That maybe there was some gene flow, which indicates there was perhaps language and religion flow. If you have a gigantic region like India, Persia put together, and it's so prosperous, mainly India, then obviously people from all over the rest of the world will want to migrate there. So you will have some small trickles of steppe admixture coming in. Does it mean that they brought the language and culture and everything? Such utter illogical nonsense, and yet so many people believe it because that's what you are taught in your textbooks in school, and that's what your professors believe because they don't want to learn anything new anymore. So this theory is still the favorite theory of the white man and the favorite theory of the colonized Indian, but it will die a slow death, this theory, because no evidence is ever going to emerge which will prove any of the central claims of this theory. Okay, Amisha has two questions. Firstly, what's the difference between Persians and Arabs? Secondly, what are the similarities and differences between the Persians, the Ottoman Turks and the Arabs? So essentially what Amisha is asking is, what's the difference between the Persians, the Turks and the Arabs? So first of all, if you call a Persian person Arabic, you're Arabs, they'll be offended. Okay? If you call a Persian person that you're Turkish, they'll not like it either. And so on. Because they're Persian, right? If you call an Indian something else, the Indians will be offended. Similar thing. So what's the difference? The Persians are an Indo-Iranian people. The true Persians were just like people from Western India. Today, if you look at Persians, some of them look like white people because they were under Turkic occupation for many centuries. And the Turks brought in people from the Caucasus region and settled them in Iran, present-day Iran. And that's how, and because everybody had the same religion, they started intermingling, intermarrying, and that's how many Persians became kind of Europeanized. So today you will see many Persians with blue eyes or green eyes. Some of them will have blonde hair. But the original Parshva people, the original Persian people looked like this. Okay? So the Persians, the true Persians are our close cousins. They are our brothers and sisters, essentially. If you are an Indian from the north and west of India, the original Persians were just like us. Same ethnicity. Today's Persians are maybe somewhat different. They may have kind of got mixed up with these outside, the immigrants who were brought in from outside, but culturally they are still Persian, at least the language. See, the Persian language is very close to Indian languages. It has nothing in similar with the Arabic languages, with the Arabic language. Of course, a lot of Arabic loan words are used in Persian language today. Just like in Hindi, we use a lot of Arabic and Turkic and Persian loan words because of the history, right, of foreign occupation of India. So the Persians are an Indo-Iranian people. They are not a Semitic people like the Arabs. Okay, different ethnicity. The Turks are neither Persian nor Semitic. They are Turkic. Their origin was in Central Asia. Their deep origin is in the Mongolia region, where the Huns emerged. And the Huns were the ancestors of the Turkic people. And the Turkic people were the ancestors of today's Turks. But if you look at the genetics of today's Turkish people, in Turkey, they are like more than 95% Greek. And that's a whole different story. So that's the similarities, differences, and so on. What's the similarities between the Turks, Arabs, and Persians? Religion. Islam. The Persians today are Shia Muslims, and most Arabs and Turks are Sunni Muslims. Yeah, so that's the differences and similarities between these three ethnic groups. Okay, Meiji Restoration. Amisha says, how did the Meiji Dynasty restoration change Japan's political and economic landscape? And Nirvana Shank says, the Meiji Restoration crushed Buddhism and old traditions. What happened? How did it change society? So what is this Meiji Restoration? Did it really crush Buddhism and old traditions? The Meiji Restoration was a coup in Japan. It was essentially a takeover of power from the emperor by a bunch of bureaucrats, by a bunch of officials. But they did not kill the emperor or depose the emperor. They turned the emperor into a figurehead, into a puppet. They forced him to eat beef. The emperor was a teenager with very little power. So the bureaucrats turned him into a puppet, and they unleashed what is now called the Meiji Restoration, which is named after the Meiji emperor, even though he was merely a puppet in the hands of these officials, court officials. So Japan has a roughly 2000 year history of a syncretic culture. Shinto and Indian culture mixed together. The Indian culture is mainly manifested in the form of Buddhism. But you will see every Indian god being worshipped in Japan with Japanese names. Saraswati is Benzaiten, Ganesha is Kangiten, you have Kuber, you have Lord Shiva, you have Bhairav, you have every Indian god worshipped in Japan through various local names. And all of this is portrayed as being part of Buddhism in Japan. So for at least 1600 years, close to 2000 years, Japan practiced a syncretic form of Shinto, which is the native culture, and Buddhism, Hinduism, which came through China from India, and which also syncretized beautifully with the local culture, because both are polytheistic systems and both are super compatible with each other. Now, and the samurai class of Japan was Buddhist class. They abhorred beef. They would never eat beef. For 1,000 years, no Japanese ate beef. Beef was taboo, just like in India. And the samurais were mainly vegetarians. They ate some fish. And they were you could say the Kshatriyas or the Rajputs of Japan. Not the Rajputs, the Kshatriyas of Japan. They were the warrior class. And they held the real power in Japan. So the Meiji Restoration was about destroying the system of the samurais. First of all, that was the first objective. And what the Meiji Restoration did, the officials who really had the real power, they brought in Americans to train the troops in Western warfare methodologies. They brought in gunpowder and guns and machine guns, those Gatling, those primitive Gatling guns and all that. And they started employing a whole different set of tactics and strategies compared to the samurai who were steeped in ancient tradition. And then they wiped out the samurai. So the entire power structure of Japan was made to disappear, and all the power then became concentrated in the name of the emperor, but the actual power was it lay with the court officials. That's first. But the samurai were Buddhist, so you had to attack Buddhism also, right? Otherwise the people there'll be social issues. So then they tried to portray Buddhism as a foreign religion, and they tried to destroy Buddhism. Did not work. Buddhism, they could not uproot from Japan. Did not work. But what did happen is that because of their efforts to destroy Buddhism, today Buddhism is looked upon in Japan as a foreign religion. A religion that came from outside. It's a Japanese religion. It's practiced by lots of people. But it's a religion that people in Japan today see as something that came from outside, came from India. Before the Meiji Restoration, it was seen as a purely Japanese religion. So that's what it did. So the old way of life was destroyed. The samurai tradition was destroyed. Buddhism was now regarded differently. All power was concentrated in the figurehead of the emperor, but it was actually wielded by his officials, and that gave rise to the Japanese imperial era, which ended with 2 American atomic tests on the people of Japan. Okay. Somi, this is the last question. Somi says, who were the Huguenots? Why did the Huguenots fail to make France Protestant? Also, why did the Spanish Armada fail to make England Catholic again? Second question first. Why did the Spanish Armada fail to make England Catholic again? Because the Armada was defeated. That's why they failed to make England Catholic again. As simple as that. They were defeated. The Spanish Armada was this huge fleet of, 3 million ships the Spanish had sent to conquer England. They were so confident they sent all kinds of extra stuff with the ships. Several hundred ships. But the English were able to defeat the Spanish Armada, which was a catastrophe for Spain. And the Spaniards wanted to turn England Catholic again. England was by that time a Protestant kingdom because of the great exploits of Shri Henry VIII. We'll not go into that story right now. So that's why the Spanish Armada could not make England Catholic again because it failed. It was routed. Who were the Huguenots? The Huguenots were Calvinists, Protestants. Who was Calvin? John Calvin. If you go to Geneva, the University of Geneva, you will see a mural with a set of human figures on it, one of which is Calvin. Now, Calvin was a reformer. He was a Protestant. He wanted to reform Christianity from the religion of the popes, which he said was very which was corrupted, probably, according to him. So he needed to bring Christianity back to its roots, which is the austere fundamentalist roots of Christianity. So that and the people who followed him became known as the Protestants or Calvinists. So the Huguenots were Calvinists and Protestants, same thing essentially, and they were French. And some prominent people became Huguenots, and that's why they gained some prominence in society. And some small regions in France kind of became Protestant, very small. It was a very minor thing. But overall, France was Catholic, a deeply Catholic country. They didn't like this. So that's why there was this social strife, and there were a few massacres. There were these religious wars in France. And this was all in the 16th century. And eventually, many of the Huguenots, they crossed the Atlantic Ocean and landed in the New World. And they tried to establish a foothold there. Some of it succeeded, most of it failed. And that's the Huguenots. So they failed to make France Protestant because France was overwhelmingly Catholic. All the authorities were Catholic, the kings were Catholic, and so on, and they did not want this new nonsense to come in and to upend society. And that's why this was crushed. Okay, end of the questions for today. Let me take some questions from the live chat, a few. Okay, in case you have some. Okay, Shiv says, eat eggs and lamb. Stop the lentils overdose. All right. Okay, you're discussing something else entirely over here, are we? Japanese PM Ishiba resigned. Well, Japan has a revolving door prime ministership. Japan is not a sovereign country. Please understand that. Japan is not a sovereign country. Their prime ministers don't matter. Only one prime minister has mattered in Japan's history after 1945, and he was assassinated. It doesn't matter. PMs come and PMs go. They don't really are able to achieve anything. Do we have super chats? Oh, we have super chats. So please don't take any more super chats. Please, I'm ending the stream now. But let me take these three since these people have taken super chats. Ganpati says, you say Japan has been a vassal of the US since the Second World War, but I disagree. Japan has been a vassal since 1853, since Perry forced them to open. The process started at that time. But Japan was not a vassal at that time because you do not have a US written Japanese constitution and you do not have a US occupation of Japan. Japan went against the US. Japan fought the US. Japan defeated the Russians. Japan invaded much of Asia. Does it look like the actions of a vassal? Completely independent actions. Do you understand that forcing somebody to end the isolation policy of several decades doesn't make that nation a vassal? It simply opens up the nation, and then the nation realized that if we don't become like the Westerners, we will be enslaved by them. And that's why Japan underwent the Meiji Restoration. And that's how Japan became this hegemonic, expansionist imperial power, which is the exact opposite of a vassal. So, please understand this. Understand the difference. There are nuances that you have to understand. You have to take your analysis deeper than surface level. Secret Billionaire says, according to Bhagavad Gita, Varna isn't based on birth and family, but nowadays we don't follow it. Question 1, what is truth according to Hinduism? I don't know. Question 2, when did the switch happen? Who could have done it? Look, I don't know about this entire thing. Look, you are, so the question you are asking, it's the presupposition you're making is that the Bhagavad Gita is the one book we should refer to. Is that the only holy book in our culture and civilization? We have hundreds, thousands of holy books. We have a whole library that's holy, a massive library that's holy. We have the Vedas. The Vedas don't refer to any Varna, sure, right? But eventually society changes. Our society has evolved over thousands of years. The Bhagavad Gita, was spoken by Shri Krishna on the battlefield to Arjun, that happened maybe 4, 5, 6,000 years ago. But that was a modern period compared to the Vedic age, which happened several thousand years before that. So during the Vedic age, society was different. There was no Varna Jati. During the Mahabharata era, once again, we do not have Varna Jati, as far as we know. Or if we had it, it was not based on birth or family. But during the Gupta era, which is the past 1500 years ago, society was different. Our society is so ancient. We've had time periods of thousands of years where lots of changes happened. At some point in time, something or the other happened, and endogamy came in, and certain changes happened in society. So, it looks like this system of jati, that the society becomes endogamous within the jati system. It probably happened about 1500 or so years before today, during the Gupta era. Probably. What is the truth according to Hinduism? There are so many truths according to Hinduism. See, if we have this Abrahamic monotheistic outlook in which there is only one truth, then it's no longer a Hindu way of looking at things. Right? So that's what I would say. The truth is complicated. There's not one truth. We are a society that's been around for 10,000 plus years. We have had different truths in different 1,000-year periods. Understand that. That's the deal. Okay, last question for today. Sparsh says, is the Mecca Site and Kaaba related to ancient Hinduism and has connections to Shiva? I am not aware of any of such thing. Because I've not looked into the history of Mecca, Kaaba, all that. I've never studied the ancient history of Arabia. I have not done that. I have not studied Islam. Okay, so I have zero standing to comment on these issues. I don't know about the history. I don't know in any great detail the history of Islam, the details of the history of Islam. I don't know in any great detail the history of Kaaba and Mecca and all that in any great detail. And if there are Indian connections, I'm not aware of them. We know that there was a pagan temple. There were many, maybe, I don't know how many, lots of statues of pagan gods. Yes, pre-Islamic gods. We know that. It's true. There are reports of ancient 8,000-year-old temple in Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure of that. So we know what I can tell you from the little knowledge I have is that this place was indeed a pre-Islamic polytheistic place. And there apparently was a temple there with lots of different statues of gods and goddesses which were all destroyed. That's what I know. Was there a connection with ancient Hinduism? Look, Arabia is right across the Western Indian Ocean, the Sea of Saurashtra. We had during the Saraswati Sindhu period of our history, we had trading posts there in Oman and so on. So we had a presence there. So there was definitely people-to-people connection between the people of India, of the subcontinent, and the people of Arabia and Mesopotamia. Definite people-to-people connections were there. Right? So was there a religious connection also? It is possible, but I can't say for sure. Because I haven't studied it. All right, that's all I can say. I'm sorry if I am not able to answer your question, but my knowledge is limited in these matters, in the matters of the history of Arabia and the history of Islam. My knowledge is limited. So, yeah, that's all I can tell you. All right, thank you everybody for all the questions. I'm going to end this here because in 2 hours I have another live stream, which is about geopolitics. So I'm going to end this here. Thank you so much everybody for all the questions. We're going to keep doing this. Hopefully everybody gets to ask questions and get their questions answered as long as the questions are good and interesting to me. Okay, so I'll end it over here. Thank you so much everyone. Do check out the books I'm publishing. Okay, I'm writing it for you all. I'm not writing a black holes books for scientists. I'm writing it for the general public. All right, I'm ending it here. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next live stream. Take care. Bye bye. See you soon.